The ship was dying. Yuna could feel it in her bones as the metal screamed around her. Red lights flashed everywhere. Alarms filled the air with their terrible sound. She held onto her seat with both hands and prayed to any god that might listen. The Starling's Grace had been a good ship. It had carried colonists and diplomats across the stars for 15 years. Now it was falling through the sky of a moon called Veth-4, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Yuna was not a soldier. She was not a pilot. She was just a farmer. She grew plants on space stations and taught others how to grow food in strange soil. She was 34 years old, and she had never been in a real emergency before today. The ship hit the trees first. Yuna heard them break like bones. Then the ground came up to meet them, and the world turned into noise and pain and darkness. When she woke up, the first thing she noticed was the silence. The alarms had stopped. The engines had stopped. Everything had stopped. She was hanging upside down in her seat, held by straps that had saved her life. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her head. Her arms hurt. Her chest hurt. But she was alive. Yuna released the straps and fell to what had been the ceiling. She lay there for a moment, breathing, thinking, trying to remember where she was and what had happened. The memories came back slowly, like water filling a cup. The diplomatic mission. The Rothri envoy and their families. The sudden engine failure. The fall. She pushed herself up and looked around. The passenger section was destroyed. Metal had twisted into strange shapes. Wires hung from everywhere like dead vines. And there were bodies. Yuna closed her eyes and made herself breathe. She had seen death before. Her grandmother had died when she was young. But this was different. This was violent and sudden and wrong. She opened her eyes and started moving. The pilot was dead. His neck was broken. The co-pilot was dead too. The two diplomats from Earth were dead. And the Rothri adults, the massive, fur-covered beings who had seemed so strong and unbreakable, they were dead as well. The crash had not cared how big they were or how sharp their claws were. But then Yuna heard something. A small sound. A whimper. She followed the sound to the back of the ship, climbing over broken metal and stepping around things she did not want to look at. The cargo area had been turned into a nursery for the journey. It was half crushed now, but somehow, impossibly, the safety pods had held. 7 Rothri cubs looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. They were small. That was the first thing Yuna noticed. She had expected the children of apex predators to be large and dangerous, but these cubs were no bigger than human toddlers. They had soft silver-black fur and round faces and tiny claws that looked like they could barely scratch paper. One of them made a sound. It was not a word. Rothri cubs did not learn to speak until they were older. It was just a cry, a call for help, a question that needed no translation. Where are my parents? Where is my mother? Why am I scared? Yuna felt something break inside her chest. Not a bone. Something else. Something that had been keeping her calm and distant and safe. She knelt down and opened the first safety pod. The cub inside scrambled out and pressed against her leg, shaking. She opened the second pod. The third. The fourth. Soon all 7 cubs were free, and they surrounded her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had gone mad. "It's okay," she said. Her voice was rough. "It's okay. I'm here." They did not understand her words. She knew that. But they understood her tone. They understood that she was not running away. They understood that she was staying. While Yuna looked at the bodies of the adult Rothri. These cubs' parents. Their protectors. Gone in an instant. Taken by bad luck and failing. Engines and a moon that had never asked for visitors. She looked at the distress beacon on the wall. It was damaged. The light that should have been green was dark and dead. She looked outside through a crack in the hull. The jungle of HFY stretched in every direction. Trees taller than buildings, vines thick as arms, and sounds. So many sounds. Clicking and howling and things moving through the underbrush. The sun was going down. Yuna was a farmer. She was not trained for this. She did not know how to survive on an alien moon. She did not know how to fight predators, or find food, or keep 7 children alive in a place that wanted to kill them. But she knew one thing. She knew it in her bones, in her blood, in every part of her being. She was not going to let these cubs die. She gathered them close. Their fur was soft against her arms. They smelled like something sweet, like honey mixed with rain. One of them, the smallest female, grabbed onto her shirt and would not let go. "I've got you," Yuna whispered. "I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." The jungle grew darker. The sounds grew louder. Somewhere out there, things were waking up. Things with teeth and hunger and no mercy for the weak. Yuna held the cubs tighter and started making a plan. She did not know if rescue would come. She did not know if the beacon could be fixed. She did not know if she would survive the night. But she knew she would try. For them, she would try. The jungle of HFY did not sleep. As the last light left the sky, the moon came alive with sounds that made Yuna's skin crawl. Clicks and screams and deep rumbling calls that seemed to come from everywhere. At once, she had found shelter beneath the roots of a massive tree. The roots twisted out of the ground like giant fingers, creating a small hollow underneath. It was not much. It was barely big enough for her and the 7 cubs. But it was something. Yuna had taken a metal strut from the broken ship. It was as long as her arm and had a sharp, jagged end where it had snapped. It was not a real weapon. She knew that. But it was better than nothing. The cubs were quiet now. They had cried themselves out in the first hour after the crash. Now they just huddled together in a pile of soft fur and trembling bodies. The smallest one, the female Yuna had started calling Bori in her mind, was pressed against her side. The little cub had not let go of her since the safety pod opened. Yuna did not know if Bori was the cub's real name. She did not speak Rothari, but the cub needed something to be called, and Bori felt right somehow. The night grew darker. Yuna could see lights now, moving between the trees. But they were not friendly lights. They were the eyes of predators, glowing with bioluminescence. Watching and waiting. She counted them. 10, 20, more than she could track. They knew the ship had crashed. They had heard it fall. They had smelled the blood and the fear. And now they were coming to see what easy meals the sky had delivered. The first creature came. Just after midnight. Yuna heard it before she saw it. A scratching sound on the bark above her. A heavy breathing that was wet and wrong. Then a face appeared at the entrance to the hollow. It was not a face that belonged to any animal Yuna knew. It had too many eyes and a mouth that opened sideways instead of up and down. Its body was covered in something that looked like wet leather, and it had 6 legs that ended in hooks. The cubs whimpered. Bori pressed harder against Yuna's side. Yuna did not think. She did not plan. She just moved. She drove the metal strut into the creature's face with all her strength. It screamed, a sound like glass breaking, and pulled back. Black blood dripped from the wound. Yuna screamed too, not from courage but from pure terror, and stabbed again. The creature fell away into the darkness. She heard it thrashing in the undergrowth, making sounds of pain and confusion. Then it went quiet. Yuna's hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. She had never killed anything larger than an insect before today. Now she had blood on her hands and a dead thing somewhere in the darkness outside. She wanted to cry. She wanted to curl up and hide and wait for someone to save her. But the cubs were watching her with their big, round eyes. They were depending on her. They had no one else. She swallowed her tears and kept her grip on the strut. The second creature came an hour later. It was smaller than the first, but faster. It got inside the hollow before Yuna could react, snapping at the cubs with a mouth full of needle teeth. Yuna grabbed it. By the throat dot, she did not know where the strength came from. She had never been strong. She had failed the physical tests at the farming academy twice. But in that moment, with those cubs in danger, she found something inside herself that she had never known was there. She slammed the creature against the root wall. Once, twice, 3 times. It scratched her arms with its claws, drawing blood that ran hot down her skin. She did not let go. She kept hitting it against the wood until it stopped moving. Then she threw its body outside and returned to her place at the entrance. Her arms were torn and bleeding. The pain was sharp and constant. One of the cubs, a male she had started calling Taiho, approached her slowly. He sniffed at her wounds. Then he did something that made her heart ache. He licked the blood away. His tongue was rough, like a cat's tongue but bigger. The gesture was gentle and careful. He looked up at her with eyes that held something she could not name. Gratitude, maybe. Or trust. Or something deeper. Yuna did not sleep that night. She could not. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard something moving outside. Every time she started to drift away, a new sound would snap her back to alertness. 3 more creatures came before dawn. She killed them all. By the time the first light touched the sky, Yuna was covered in blood. Some of it was hers. Most of it was not. Her arms were a mess of cuts and scratches. Her muscles burned from exhaustion. Her eyes felt like they were filled with sand. But the cubs were alive. All 7 of them, alive and unharmed, piled together in the hollow behind her. Yuna looked at them and felt something strange. Something warm, despite the cold morning air. These were not her children. They were not even her species. But in one long, terrible night, they had become hers to protect. She did not know what the day would bring. She did not know how she would find food or water or rescue. She did not know if she would survive another night. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not stop fighting. Not for them. Never for them. The beacon was their only hope. Yuna had checked it again in the morning light. The circuits were damaged, but not destroyed. If she could get to higher ground, away from the interference of the thick jungle, it might work. It had to work. She looked at the ridge in the distance. It rose above the trees like a sleeping giant, its peak touching the clouds. It was far, very far, but it was their only chance. The cubs watched her with tired eyes as she prepared for the journey. She tore strips of fabric from the ship's emergency blankets and made carriers for the smallest ones. 2 cubs could hang on her back. 1 could ride on her chest. The other 4 would have to walk. Bori refused to leave her side. The little female cub grabbed onto Yuna's leg and looked up with eyes that said everything words could not. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." "I'm not leaving you," Yuna said softly. "I'm not leaving any of you. We're going together." She picked up Bori and put her in the chest carrier. The cub immediately pressed her face against Yuna's heart and went still. The sound of the heartbeat seemed to calm her. They started walking at dawn. The jungle of Veth 4 was not kind to travelers. The ground was uneven and covered with roots that grabbed at feet. The air was thick and hot and made every breath feel like drinking water. Insects buzzed around them constantly, some as big as Yuna's hand. The older cubs tried their best to keep up. They stumbled and fell and got back up again. One of them, a male she called Junho, had a bad leg from the crash. He limped but never complained. Cubs did not complain. They just endured. By midday, Yuna was carrying 3 cubs instead of 2. Her shoulders burned. Her back screamed with pain. But she kept walking. The emergency rations were running out. She had grabbed everything she could from the ship, but there had not been much. She gave most of it to the cubs. Growing children needed food more than she did. She could survive on less. Her stomach complained. She ignored it. On the second day, something bit Taiho. The cub was walking beside her when a creature burst from the undergrowth. It was small and fast, with a tail that ended in a sharp point. It struck Taiho on the arm before Yuna could react, then disappeared back into the plants. Taiho screamed. His arm swelled. His breathing became fast and shallow. Yuna did not panic. She could not afford to panic. She grabbed Taiho and looked at the wound. It was small, but already turning purple. Poison. She did the only thing she could think of. She put her mouth to the wound and sucked. The taste was bitter and wrong. It made her tongue go numb immediately. She spat and sucked again. Spat and sucked. Over and over until no more dark fluid came out. Her lips were numb for hours afterward. Her head felt strange and light. But Taiho's breathing returned to normal. The swelling went down. He would live. The cub looked at her with wonder in his eyes. He did not understand what she had done. He only knew that she had taken his pain away. By the third day, Yuna could barely walk. Her wounds from the first night had become infected. Red lines spread from the cuts on her arms. Her body shook with fever. Every step felt like climbing a mountain. But the ridge was closer now. She could see it clearly through the gaps in the trees. Just a little more. Just a little further. She collapsed at noon. The ground came up fast, and she could not stop herself from falling. The cubs on her back tumbled off. Bori cried out in alarm. Yuna tried to get up, but her arms would not hold her weight. This is it, she thought. This is where I die. But the cubs did not let her die. They gathered around her, all 7 of them. The older ones grabbed her arms and legs and pulled her into the shade of a large plant. Junho, despite his bad leg, helped drag her body across the ground. Taiho brought leaves and piled them under her head. And Bori went to find water. The little female cub was gone for 10 minutes. When she came back, her paws were cupped together, holding a tiny amount of water. Most of it spilled before she reached Yuna, but some remained. She pressed her paws against Yuna's lips and let the water drip into her mouth. Thought it was not enough. It was almost nothing, but it was everything. Yuna opened her eyes and saw 7 faces looking down at her. 7 cubs who should have been helpless. 7 children who had watched and learned and decided that if the human could protect them, they could protect her too. She started to cry. The cubs did not understand tears. Rothari did not cry the same way humans did. But they understood sadness. They understood need. They piled on top of her, all 7 of them, covering her with their warm fur. Their small bodies pressed against her feverish skin. Their heartbeats mixed with hers. They stayed like that until sunset. When Yuna woke, her fever had broken. She was weak, weaker than she had ever been in her life. But she was alive. The ridge waited above them. One more day. Just one more day. She gathered the cubs close and made herself stand. Tomorrow, they would reach the top. Tomorrow, she would turn on the beacon. Tomorrow, everything would change. They reached the ridge on the 4th day. Yuna's legs had stopped shaking somewhere around noon. Her body had moved past exhaustion into something else. Something that felt like floating and falling at the same time. But they made it. The view from the top was beautiful. The jungle stretched out below them like a green ocean, going on forever in every direction. The gas giant hung in the sky, massive and swirling with storms bigger than planets. It was the kind of view that would make people stop and stare. Yuna did not have time to stare. She pulled out the beacon and found a flat rock to place it on. Her fingers moved slowly as she opened the case and checked the circuits. The damage was there, visible and ugly, but the core was intact. The signal generator was intact. She pressed the button. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, a small green light blinked on. Once, twice. Again. The beacon was working. Yuna laughed. It was a broken sound, more like a sob than anything happy, but it was real. The signal was going out. Someone would hear it. Someone would come. "We did it," she said to the cubs. They did not understand her words, but they understood her smile. Bori made a sound that might have been happy. Taiho wagged his small tail. Then the jungle below them went quiet. Yuna had learned to read the sounds of HFY over the past 4 days. She knew what silence meant. Silence meant something big was moving. Something that scared everything else. She stood up slowly and turned around. The HFY stalker emerged from the tree line like a nightmare coming to life. It was massive. 6 meters long from nose to tail. Its body was covered in scales that shifted color as it moved, blending with the plants and shadows. Its head was flat and wide, with eyes that burned like yellow fire. Its mouth opened to show teeth as long as Yuna's fingers. This was the apex predator of HFY, the thing that sat at the top of the food chain. The creature that had no enemies and no fear. It had been following them. Maybe since the first day? Waiting, hunting, and now, with its prey cornered on the ridge, it had come to collect its meal. Yuna looked at the cubs. They looked at her. She picked up her metal strut, the same one she had carried since the crash. It was bent now and stained with the blood of a dozen smaller creatures. Against the stalker, it was nothing. A toy. A joke, but it was all she had. "Get behind me," she said. The cubs moved without hesitation. They had learned this lesson well over 4 days and 3 nights. When danger came, the human stood in front. Always in front. The stalker watched this with its burning eyes. It tilted its head, curious. It had never seen prey that did not run. It had never seen anything stand between it and food. It charged. Yuna met it. The impact threw her backward. Pain exploded through her body as claws found her shoulder and tore. She hit the ground hard, losing the air in her lungs. The stalker was on her in an instant, its weight pressing down, its teeth reaching for her throat. She jammed the strut into its mouth and pushed. The creature screamed and pulled back. Blood dripped from its tongue where the metal had cut. It looked at her with something new in its eyes. Not fear. Stalkers did not know fear. But surprise. Confusion. Why was this small thing still fighting? Yuna got to her feet. Her shoulder was ruined. Blood ran down her arm in rivers. She could see bone through the torn flesh. The pain was so big that it became small again, turning into a distant roar at the edge of her mind. The stalker circled around her, trying to reach the cubs. She moved with it, keeping herself between them. Her legs were shaking. Her vision was going dark at the edges. "Stay up," she told herself. "Just stay up." The creature lunged again. Its claws caught her leg and opened it from hip to knee. She fell but kept her grip on the strut. As the stalker came for her face, she stabbed upward, driving the metal into its neck. It was not a killing blow. The scales were too thick, the muscle too dense. But it hurt. The stalker roared and threw her aside like a doll. Yuna hit a rock and felt her ribs break. 2 of them. Maybe 3. The pain was white-hot and endless. "Get up," she thought. "Get up. They need you." She got up. The cubs were screaming now. Not in fear. In rage. Little Taiho threw himself at the stalker's leg and bit down with his tiny teeth. Junho scratched at its scales with his weak claws. Bori stood in front of the others, her small body shaking but refusing to move. They were trying to protect her. These children. These helpless, beautiful children. They were trying to save her life. Yuna felt something rise in her chest. Something hot and bright and terrible. It was not courage. It was not hope. It was the simple animal refusal to let these cubs die. The stalker shook off Taiho and turned back to her. It was wounded now, bleeding from a dozen small cuts. But it was still strong, still deadly, still so much more than she could ever hope to fight. It opened its mouth and roared. Yuna roared back. She charged. The creature snapped at her, its teeth closing on air as she ducked under its head. She drove her strut upward with everything she had left, every bit of strength, every drop of will, every scrap of love she felt for 7 small cubs, who had become her world. The metal punched through the creature's eye and into its brain. The stalker fell. Yuna fell with it. She lay on the ground, staring at the sky. The gas giant swirled above her. Beautiful, so beautiful. The cubs gathered around her, their faces blocking the view. They were crying in their own way, making sounds of distress and fear. Bori pressed against her cheek, her fur wet with Yuna's blood. "It's okay," Yuna whispered. "It's okay. You're safe now." She closed her eyes. The beacon blinked its green light into the sky, calling for help that might already be too late. The Rothery rescue ship cut through the atmosphere of Vethfor like a blade through water. It was a military vessel, fast and deadly, carrying the best warriors the Rothery fleet had to offer. Commander Daesung stood at the front of the drop team. He was old by Rothery standards, his silver-black fur streaked with white around the muzzle. He had fought in 3 interstellar wars. He had killed enemies with his bare claws. He had seen things that would break lesser beings, but his hands were shaking as the ship descended. The beacon had come. From the Starling's Grace, the diplomatic transport carrying Ambassador Hyunwoo and his family. The ambassador's mate. His 7 cubs. The ship had been reported lost 4 days ago. No one had expected survivors. The beacon told a different story. They landed on the ridge as the sun began to set. Daesung was first out of the ship, his warriors spreading behind him in a defensive formation. The jungle was quiet. Too quiet. Something had happened here. Then he saw it. The Veth stalker lay dead in the center of the ridge. Its body was massive, its scales dull in death. A metal strut stuck out of its eye socket, driven deep into the brain. Around it, like offerings at a shrine, lay the bodies of other predators. Daesung counted 12. Some had been killed with the strut. Others had been beaten to death. The ground was dark with old blood, and in the middle of it all, surrounded by 7 cubs, was a human dot. She was small. So impossibly small. Daesung had seen humans before, but he had never really understood how fragile they were until this moment. Her body was broken in ways that made his stomach turn. Her shoulder was torn open. Her leg was sliced to the bone. Her ribs were crushed. She should have been dead. By every law of biology and nature, she should have been dead. But she was breathing. The 7 cubs were piled on top of her and around her. They had arranged themselves carefully, covering her with their fur, sharing their warmth with her cooling body. When they saw the Rothery warriors approaching, they did not move. They did not run to their own kind. They growled. 7 tiny growls, weak and high-pitched, from 7 cubs who had never been taught to fight. They bared their small teeth and flattened their ears and refused to leave the human side. Daesung stopped walking. His warriors stopped behind him. One of the cubs, a small female, looked up at him with eyes that held something ancient and fierce. She opened her mouth and spoke in broken Galactic Common. The words were wrong. The grammar was wrong, but the meaning was clear. She, stay. She, not leave. The cub had learned to speak. In 4 days, she had learned her first words. And those words were about the human who had protected her. Daesung felt something shift in his chest. Something he had not felt in a very long time. He looked at the scene before him, the dead stalker, the dead predators, the tiny human woman who had stood against them all. The cubs who had watched her do it. In Rothery culture, there was a title given only to the greatest warriors, those who stood between death and the young, those who faced impossible odds and refused to fall. They were called guardians, and they were honored above all others. Daesung had met guardians before. He had fought beside them. He had buried them. He had never expected to find one in a human farmer. Slowly, carefully, he knelt beside Yuna. Her eyes fluttered open. They were clouded with pain and fever, but they found his face and held on. "The cubs," she whispered. Her voice was barely there. "Are they okay? Are they safe?" Not asking about herself. Not asking about rescue or medical care or anything else. Just asking about the cubs. Daesung felt his throat tighten. "They are safe," he said. "Because of you." Yuna smiled. It was a small smile, broken and tired, but real. "Good," she said. "That's good." Her eyes started to close. "Stay awake," Daesung said. "The medics are coming. You need to stay awake." But she was already drifting away, her strength finally giving out after 4 days of refusing to stop. Daesung looked at his warriors. They were standing in silence, their eyes fixed on the human. These were soldiers who had seen death and war and the darkest parts of the galaxy. None of them were speaking. None of them could find words. He reached up and removed the combat insignia from his chest. It was the highest honor he possessed, given to him by the Rothery High Council for saving a colony from invasion. He had worn it for 30 years. He placed it gently on Yuna's chest, over her heart. Then he bowed his head. Around him, one by one, his warriors did the same. Apex predators of the galaxy. The species that had never been to another. They bowed to a human farmer who had refused to let 7 cubs die. The medics arrived and began their work. They mended what they could. They stabilized what they could not mend. Through it all, the cubs refused to leave. They had to be carried onto the medical ship still pressed against Yuna's body. She survived. It took months. Many surgeries. Long nights of pain and doubt. But she survived. When she woke in the Rothery hospital, 7 cubs were sleeping on her bed. Bori was curled against her neck. Taiho was draped across her legs. The others filled every space around her. Daesung visited her on the 3rd day of her consciousness. He brought flowers from his home world, purple and gold, the colors of honor. "The council has made a decision," he said. "You have been granted the title of guardian. It has never been given to a non-Rothery before. You are the first." Yuna looked at the cubs sleeping around her. "I just did what anyone would do," she said. Daesung shook his head. "No, you did what no one else could do. You stood when falling would have been easy. You fought when surrender would have been forgiven. You loved when love should have been impossible." He paused. "That is not what anyone would do. That is what a guardian does." Years passed. Yuna grew old and gray. Her shoulder never healed properly. Her leg always hurt when it rained. But she never minded. 7 adult Rothery, each standing 3 meters tall, each a warrior in their own right, still called her mother. They visited her on her birthday. They called her every week. They named their own cubs after her. When she finally died, surrounded by her impossible family, the Rothery did not mourn in their own way. They had their own customs, their own rituals, their own ways of saying goodbye. But for Yuna, they did something different. They mourned in hers. They gathered around her bed and held her hands and cried human tears that their biology should not have allowed. They buried her on the Rothery home world in the Garden of Guardians, where only the greatest heroes were laid to rest. And on her stone, they carved words in both Galactic Common and Rothery. She stayed. She did not leave. The Rothery historian who wrote about her said it best. We are the apex. We have always known this. But on HFY 4, we learned that apex is not about size or strength or claws. It is about what you are willing to lose to protect what matters. By this measure, we learned we were not alone at the top. The humans had always been there, waiting for us to notice. Yuna had been a farmer. Just a farmer. But in the end, she grew something that no one expected. She grew a family. And that family would remember her forever.